All right, so Nikki Haley refuses to drop out of the primary race, even though she just lost her home state of South Carolina. That was the state that she was completely banking on, but she lost. You could see here that everything in the red, Donald Trump ended up winning here. 60% of the vote, just about. Nikki Haley getting 40%. She's got those green areas. And Nikki Haley is refusing to drop out of the race, even though she's lost not only her home state, which I thought for sure she would be done. If she lost her home state, she would realize, okay, that's it. Can't win anymore. Got to bow out. But no, she's instead said, I'm not leaving. People like me. That's essentially what she's saying here. This is what she tweeted out. I'm an accountant. I know 40% isn't 50%, but I also know that 40% is not a small number. Americans deserve a choice in this election, and I have a duty to give it to them. Well, she should know that 40% is not 50%. And in fact, it's not even close to winning the primary. She's, again, lost every single state that there's been a primary. I mean, let's go over some of the primary locations. Let's see. So they start off in Iowa. She ended up getting third place in Iowa. Donald Trump took 51%. Ron DeSantis came in second with 21%, and then Nikki Haley at 19%. Then they went on to New Hampshire. Ron DeSantis at that point dropped out. She ended up getting 43% and Donald Trump 54%, so he still beat her there. In Nevada, Trump wasn't even on the ballot, and yet he essentially beat her. I mean, she got 30% of the votes in the Nevada primary, but 70% voted for somebody not on the ballot. That's literally what the box they had to check said, somebody not on this ballot. The actual term was trying to think what was the actual, when people were filling this out, it was literally, none of these candidates. None of these candidates. So Nikki Haley or none of these candidates, that's who they voted for. She wasn't in the Nevada caucus. Trump won that 99%. And Virgin Islands, they had an election as well. They've had a primary. Trump got 70%. And Nikki Haley Trump got 75%. And Nikki Haley got 25%. And that wasn't a clue. She wanted to wait for South Carolina. She went into South Carolina and she ended up just, again, being clobbered. I mean, 60% to 40%, and yet she still will not back down. She's saying, heck no, I'm not. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take. If at this point she's not backing down, I really do not know what it's going to take, and it makes me really suspicious. They have done everything, they being the establishment, they have done everything they possibly can to get rid of Donald Trump. The fact that she's still hanging on, it makes me think that she obviously still thinks she has a chance. What kind of chance does she think she has if she can't even win the state she was governor of? And not only was she a governor of South Carolina, but she was a liked governor in South Carolina. And yet she still could not beat Donald Trump. It turns out in the exit polls, they discovered that a lot of the people who were voting for Nikki Haley had never voted in a Republican primary before. The vast majority of the people who had voted in a Republican primary previously voted for Donald Trump. Those who voted for Donald Trump, in the exit polls, they said that they were voting for the candidate they wanted. Those who voted for Nikki Haley, they said that they were voting against the candidate that they did not want. That was the reason why they were voting for her. So they were not voting for her as a candidate. So she's just not an inspiring candidate. Even in her own state, the Republicans who voted, or the people, I should say, whoever it was that voted in this primary for the first time, they weren't even voting for Nikki Haley. They were voting against Donald Trump. And she was a liked governor in South Carolina. And all of the other Republicans who voted for Donald Trump because they said they liked Donald Trump. They weren't voting against Nikki Haley. They were voting for Donald Trump. So I don't know when Nikki Haley is going to just back out. But she's still going strong. So again, it makes me a little nervous about who is feeding what in her ear. What are they saying to her? Are they saying there's still a chance? Why would there still be a chance? Because Donald Trump's not actually going to be on the ballot. Why wouldn't Donald Trump be on the ballot? They've done everything they possibly can to get rid of him, except the one thing, right? Except for the final solution. And that it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous that there's maybe a thinking that, well, he's going to either be in jail or he's just not going to even be alive to run in the primary or or run in the general election. And so Nikki Haley thinks she has a chance. Otherwise, there is no chance. The Republican voters have spoken. They want Donald Trump. They're not going to change their mind. Again, they would only change their mind if they didn't have an option to vote for Donald Trump. But even if Trump was thrown in jail, or that's why I worry that it's the more permanent solution, because that people are kind of thinking might happen, which I know is sick and morbid and conspiratorial, but at the same time, they've literally done everything they possibly can to get rid of Donald Trump, everything, including trying to throw him in jail, including trying to remove his name from the ballot, trying to charge him with insurrection, impeaching him twice. I mean, they've gone overboard with at what level, how far are they willing to go? And even if he was thrown in jail, and even if his name was removed from the ballot, they would still vote for Donald Trump. They showed that in Nevada. His name wasn't on the ballot, and yet they didn't have a write-in option. So what they did was none of these candidates on the ballot, and people voted for that. That means if there was a write-in, they'd be voting for Donald Trump. So there's no way anyone other than Donald Trump gets this nomination unless there's something that happens. And I just keep saying that, but that's where my mind's going at this point. They're doing everything they possibly can to stop Donald Trump. And Nikki Haley's still oddly hanging on. So we'll see, at what point will she give up, if she ever gives up. But Trump is now moving on. He is now talking about who might be his VP pick. He was asked in a town hall by Laura Ingraham, and he's come up with, the news reports are that he has a short list, and that the short list is, they rattle off all these names, and that's how people were making it sound in the mainstream media. But the reality is that Laura Ingraham provided the short list from apparently the Fox News town hall audience members who were sitting there. And Trump just basically said, yeah, sure, they're all on the list. Watch this.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list? And when can we expect that you will announce your choice?
The one thing that always surprises me is that the VP choice has absolutely no impact. It's whoever the president is. It just seems. I remember when Sarah Palin was actually picked, and she did have a big up, and then they just went after her at a level that nobody's seen. The Republicans themselves went after what they did.
But you'll be a one-term president because you've already served, so you can only serve for one term, although they say you'll never leave office. I assume that you'll never leave. There'll never be another election
don't
again.
Don't do it. He'll never leave. He's never going. Oh, these people.
Right. So, he's basically saying, look, yeah, all of those people are great. I like all of those people. This is what Roger Stone had to say. So Tulsi Gabbard made that list. Her name has been controversial. She was a Democrat, ran in the Democrat primary just in 2020. That would have been, had she gotten that nomination, that would have been against Donald Trump. So effectively was his opponent in 2020. Obviously, that ended up going to Joe Biden. But she was recently a Democrat. She then went independent a couple of years after that, has since become a Fox News commentator. Her views have drastically shifted, in my opinion, quite conservative. She went really hard on the woke stuff. So she was really, really talking a lot about the trans and the gender stuff. She went very pro-life. She more on the culture side, embraced the conservative, I think, movement, but just mostly on those issues. Now, a lot of the conservatives online are saying they don't trust Tulsi Gabbard because they believe that, maybe on the culture stuff, she's shifted more to the right. And that was even a problem with people on the left when she was running as a Democrat or as a progressive, was that they questioned some of the statements that she had made that were quite conservative early on. I mean, she was very... She was against gay marriage, for example, and so that kind of came back to haunt her on the left. On the right, that wouldn't haunt her as much. So it is, many of us who followed Tulsi and covered her campaign quite a bit in the presidential primary now kind of, I should just talk for myself. I'm personally suspicious that though she was a defending, defending the flip on her stance on certain things that were quite conservative. I actually think that she probably was just really, truly conservative on those issues and needed to placate the left and needed to placate the progressives. And now she's being more honest about her conservatism. And I think that's totally fair. I think she might actually be a true conservative. And that's difficult to be when you're in Hawaii trying to run for office. You have to be a Democrat in Hawaii. You cannot run and win as a conservative. And now that she's, become more of a national figure, she's been able to then switch and embrace people like Meghan McCain, who she's really good friends with and apparently shares a lot of the positions with, I would assume. So, but here's Roger Stone. So though there are people who are very skeptical and they're saying, well, she's not a real Republican and we don't really like her and we want somebody else from the list. Here's Roger Stone actually advocating for Tulsi Gabbard. He thinks that she'd be a pretty good pick.
I love Ben Carson. He's a great man, but I don't know what vote you get that you don't already have with Ben Carson. I think the answer is I can't identify one. So, look, I'm a wildcatter, and I will take a beating for this, but I kind of like the idea of Tulsi Gabbard, and I'll tell you why. First of all, she's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. She's an Iraq War veteran. She was a Democrat. She's now an independent. She's clearly against the war machine.
Right.
She has become pro-life, but 4 or 5 years ago, so it's not a new position. She has moved our way on every important issue. She was a Democrat. I think she appeals to millennials. She's a championship surfer. She's very attractive, but she's not so attractive that women voters hate her.
Yeah, which is a thing.
It's a thing. It's just sadly a thing. I mean, she's very attractive, but when you're drop dead gorgeous, women immediately despise you.
Right.
So I think I like the idea. Now people say to me, well, she was a Democrat. You know what? Ronald Reagan was a Democrat. He was a very liberal Democrat. People change over time. If you get new information and you don't change, then there's something wrong with you.
Right.
I'm very impressed with her. I think that would allow you to reach out to some new voters without really upsetting the base. Now, not everybody in the base will be delighted with that, but I don't know anybody who bolts on that basis.
So I think he has a really good point on that. I agree with him that I don't think anyone bolts because she's the VP pick. I think that he's right that Trump might gain. There is a possibility he may gain some other people with Tulsi Gabbard on his ticket. I'm not totally opposed to this. I mean, look, there are a lot of positions ever since Tulsi kind of became more conservative. And she is certainly with the culture stuff, which I'm not. I mean, look, like I agree with a lot of it. I just don't think. I've always thought it was a losing position for the right to really latch on to the culture stuff. When I was on Glenn Beck's show and did some of the other shows at the Blaze, and they were really ultra conservative talking about the culture stuff, and I told them, I said, this is not what people are going to vote about. This is not, you guys think this is like the number one thing. But the reality is, and I get it, it gets clicks online. People watch that content. You think, Matt Walsh made an entire career out of it. You think that it's going to be bigger in the minds of parents and voters than it is. But look at where we are right now. What do people care about? They care about immigration more than they care about trans woke ideology and whatever it is that they care about kids being kept out of school in lockdowns. They care about kids being masked and forced to vaccinate. Those are the types of things they care about more than the woke ideology stuff. So I never thought this was going to be a winning position to kind of hang your hat on that. It'd be better to focus on things like economics, focus on immigration, focus on the war machine. Those are the winning policies that voters care about. And they'll forgive whether or not you are liberal or conservative on certain of these social issues, so as long as the things that matter to them on a day-to-day basis, the things that actually affect their daily lives, those are the things that you talk about. That's what people care about. That's what Donald Trump does. He doesn't really spend a lot of time on the woke stuff, and that's smart. Ron DeSantis went in the wrong direction. I think it was a gamble for Ron DeSantis. I think it was also a gamble for Tulsi Gabbard and others to focus on the culture and the woke stuff, when in reality, people are caring more about the kitchen table, or we call them the kitchen table issues, right? But they're really just the issues that affect the average everyday person on a regular basis. Things that they feel like are out of their control. They feel like they can control what their kids think and what their kids, I think parents trust their parenting. They trust their kids. They might not like what's going on in the schools. They certainly don't like schools stepping in and doing the parenting for them. But I really, at the end of the day, we know what voters care about. We're seeing it now. We're seeing it in the polls, and that's that. I mean, there's just really no arguing that point because the voters have spoken on those issues. So I think that there's other issues with Tulsi that I've criticized in the past. I still criticize. I don't think she's as anti-war as Roger Stone even says, or as she says. I think she's quite. She's very much against what really. It turns out that she's very pro-war on terror. And unfortunately, the war on terror is how we got into the mess that we're in right now. How can you be anti-war yet pro-war on terror when the war on terror is how we ended up in endless war since 9/11? And she's very, very pro-war on terror. Thinks that we've got to go and kill all the Islamists, all the radical jihadis, and we got to go into Africa. And she went on Tucker Carlson's show and talked about how we have to stop all of these radical jihadists in Africa. Americans do not care about the radical jihadis in Africa. Americans don't. We want to end war. We want people to come home. We want to not focus on it. We want to say, let them deal with it themselves. We don't need to be the ones dealing with it. We need to protect our borders. We need to make sure we're not being infiltrated with radical jihadists. And guess how you do that? You actually focus your resources on the border. You don't focus on Africa. So there's, so I don't think she's exactly as anti-war as many of us believed her to be, as Roger Stone believes her to be. But nonetheless, when you look at all the candidates, when you look at everybody who's out there, I don't think she's a bad VP pick for Trump. I don't think she's the best. I think Trump thinks, as he says, that you don't gain anybody by picking a VP. They don't really matter. I think there are some VP candidates you could pick where it would matter. But first, let's watch, and I'll tell you who I think that would be. But first, Trump actually seems to maybe have already made up his mind. At the town hall, he singled out Tim Scott. Watch this.
When Biden ran, he pledged he was going to pick a female vice president in 2020. What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there. And he's been so great. He's been such a great advocate. I have to say, this is in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump. And I said, I called him. I said, Tim, you're better for me than you were for yourself. But he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic person.
Someone who can step into the role.
Most importantly, you have to view that.
Okay, so he doesn't think it really matters who it is. He likes Tim Scott. He likes Tim Scott because Tim Scott doesn't talk about himself. He talks about Donald Trump. So that makes sense. He doesn't want, I think Tim Scott's probably the person he's going to end up picking. There's a possibility he goes with somebody else like Kristi Noem. But Ron DeSantis, I think for him, he's going to feel like, Ron is going to make it all about himself. He's essentially going to be running for president while he's vice president. Tim Scott, on the other hand, seems to be, like Trump said, even when he was running for president, he was talking about Donald Trump. And that's the type of VP that Donald Trump wants. However, and he's right that the person, in some ways it'll be a check mark for his presidency, black man, vice president, right? So there's these types of kind of woke things that Republicans say they don't care about that may fit into that. But at the end of the day, he's saying it doesn't really matter. And he's probably right, except I do think that if he selected Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think that would be a ticket that would be very difficult for Democrats to even remotely think they have a chance against. I do think that he would gain votes if RFK Jr. would be willing to join him as a VP pick. I don't think that RFK Jr. has a shot at winning. He could possibly split the vote. That's why I do think that Biden should court him as vice president, and so should Trump. And whoever could get Kennedy on their ticket probably has a fighting chance to actually win the general election. I think that if Joe Biden put him on his ticket, there's a real chance. Now, when it comes, look, there's certain policies that I'm not thrilled with, like every single presidential candidate, practically any of the main ones that actually have a real chance at winning any of the elections. All of them have the same exact position on Israel. There are, of course, better candidates on that particular topic, like Jill Stein, who I actually like on a lot of topics. If you watch my interview with her, just go to thekimiversonshow.com and watch the entire Jill Stein interview for an hour. She blows my mind. And actually, she blew a lot of libertarians' minds, because a lot of libertarians walked away after that interview thinking, I might, for the first time in my life, vote for Jill Stein of the Green Party. Very palatable policies that I think a lot of people really like. But nonetheless, out of the major, I hate to say it like this, but out of the major candidates that have a real shot at actually making it to the White House, that would be Joe Biden again, or whoever the Democrats decide to usher in as their replacement, Donald Trump, of course, and maybe Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as an independent. I mean, he's one of the few that has an actual chance, but it's still, even for him, extremely, extremely slim. So that being said, if whoever could nab Kennedy might actually have a better chance. Joe Biden maybe would have a better chance, even though they have the same position on Israel. I get it. But so does Donald Trump, and so do pretty much all the Republicans. And so I don't think any of that really changes anything. But the rest of the policies, Kennedy has a better position on most other policies. He has a better position on Assange. He has a better position on most people agree with him on the border crisis. I mean, he's got a lot of better policies on a lot of things. So that, and free speech, and of course the COVID pandemic, and the list goes on in favor of Kennedy. So whoever can get him as their VP pick, I think, wins the presidency practically automatically. So maybe Trump holds things close to the vest. He likes to play games. He likes to string people along. He likes to make people think it's, going to be one thing, and then he ends up doing another. So we'll see. He's pointing at Tim Scott, making Tim Scott feel like he's the guy right now. That's very much a possibility. Maybe Tim Scott will end up being the guy. Trump doesn't like to share the spotlight, so we'll see what happens. But interesting guessing games. The more interesting guessing game is going to be what actually happens with the Democrats, with Joe Biden, with, right now everybody kind of assumes a Biden-Harris ticket. I still don't think it's going to go in that direction. I think Joe Biden will not be the nominee. They're going to usher in their own person at the convention, and then that person, probably Gavin Newsom, will get to pick their own VP running mate, who will probably be, I don't know, somebody like Amy Klobuchar or something like that. So it's going to be interesting as we move forward. It's going to be interesting. So, all right, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out my full show Monday through Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, exclusively at KimIversonShow.com, thekimiversonshow.com. Check it out. See you next time.